Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. Before we go straight into today's case, I do have a couple of content warnings for you guys. In this video, we do talk about sexual assault, and this case does involve suicide, so if that's not something you think you're interested in watching, then this video probably isn't for you, so maybe you can watch some of my other videos or just wait for my next upload. On the 10th of March 2010, it was a normal school day, but on this particular day, Anika Smit wasn't feeling too well. Her dad decided that he was going to take her to the doctor before they went to school, and he decided to do this just in case the doctor didn't book her off so that she would be already dressed for school and he could just take her there. But Anika would be booked off for the day because it turned out that she had an ear infection. Her father, Johan Smit, then took her back home, their home in Theresa Park, Jacques Avenue in Pretoria North, and he dropped her off and told her that he would contact the pharmacy and have her medication delivered straight to the house later that day. After this, Johan Smit made his way to work, but before he got to work, he just dropped off an assignment that Anika had to submit that day, and then he carried on with his day. A couple of hours later, at around 12 p.m., he received a phone call from the pharmacy, and the pharmacy was just letting him know that the delivery driver had arrived at their house. The driver had hooted and no one had come out. So this is when Johan decided to try and call Anika, and Anika didn't answer the phone, but he really didn't think much of it. He just assumed that maybe she was asleep because she was sick. The delivery driver then drove off after waiting for a couple of minutes, and he didn't complete his delivery. He also did not get out of his car, and he noticed that the front gate was locked and there were two very large dogs running around in the front yard. That afternoon, Johan Smit returned home from work, and he saw that the security gate as well as the front door were unlocked, and the dogs were also not in the front yard. When he got inside the house, he didn't really notice anything strange, but as he walked further into the house, he noticed that it was a complete mess, and immediately his heart just sunk. He started calling out for Anika, and she didn't answer him, and eventually he made his way to her bedroom, and he noticed that the door was partially opened. So he opened the door and he found his daughter lying on the floor. Immediately he turned around and ran to his neighbor / friend's home, but not before grabbing a towel and covering Anika's lower part of her body. Once Johan got to his neighbor's house, he told his neighbor that he thought that someone had murdered his daughter, and they immediately ran back to the Smit home, and they went to Anika's room, and they found Anika lying on the floor with her head turned to the right. Although the later crime scene photos would show that her legs were bent, this neighbor testified that he was 100% certain that her legs were lying next to one another and were relatively straight. After they went back to Anika's room, they ran out, and it was later said that Johan did try and call the police, but they didn't answer. But fortunately, another neighbor managed to get through to them, and about 30 minutes later, the Smit house was surrounded with police officers. They went straight to Anika's room, and what they found was something that they will never forget. Anika was naked from the waist down with a bottle inserted into her. She had been R-worded and stabbed multiple times, and her throat had been slit. Both of her hands were also removed at a point between her wrist and her elbow, most likely with a hunting knife. And it was later determined that this happened post-mortem, and they determined this because there wasn't a lot of blood at the crime scene, so yeah. Anika Smit was born on the 18th of July 1992 to Charlotte and Johan Smit. She grew up in Pretoria North as an only child, and in her earlier years, their home was a picture-perfect household, and she had a really good relationship with both of her parents. Anika really enjoyed drawing and painting, and she also had a passion for playing drums. She was part of a drummer group in her school, and Anika really loved animals, so much so that she would spend her spare time volunteering at the local zoo. Unfortunately, when Anika was just 13 years old, her parents decided to get a divorce, and in 2006, her mother then moved back to the Western Cape, which wasn't that surprising because her mother is from Mossel Bay in the Western Cape. Anika stayed with her father, and she would see her mother during school holidays, but she still really missed her mother most of the time. So when she was in grade 10, she decided that she wanted to live with her mother, so she moved to the Western Cape. This move though wouldn't last long. It lasted about 9 months, and this is because Anika and her stepfather didn't get along that much, and also Anika really didn't like the strict rules that they had. So this is when she decided to move back to Pretoria North and just live with her father again. By all means, Anika was a normal teenager. She was quite a private person, but she also had her fair share of rebellion. Sometimes she would dye her hair black, sometimes it would be like ginger. She also experimented with smoking and alcohol in her teenage years, and at the time of today's case, Anika was a grade 11 student at Hoërskool Gerrit Maritz. According to one of their neighbors, this neighbor has known Johan and Charlotte for almost 23 years, and he described Johan as a very loving father. He really loved and did everything that he could for his only child and just poured all of his attention onto her, and he had a soft spot for her. On Friday the 19th of March, Anika Smit was laid to rest, and her parents continued hounding police, just trying to find out what happened to their daughter. A local businessman as well as Anika's uncle also put forward a reward for any information that would lead to the arrest of Anika's killer. But still, they had nothing. Some of the best detectives would also momentarily weigh in or get involved, like Piet Bielefeld, but still they couldn't find anything. But during their investigation, police did determine when Anika was most likely murdered and what she had gotten up to before. Johan, her father, had dropped her off at home, and at around 9 a.m. she answered a phone call from her mother. They spoke for a really long time, and her mother would always look back on this as something that she's really grateful for, because Anika was supposed to be at school. She didn't know that Anika was sick or that she was home the whole day, so they managed to speak on the phone for a really, really long time. After Anika spoke to her mom on the phone, she received a visitor. To this day, we don't know who this visitor was, but what we do know is that once this visitor got to the house, Anika locked up their 2 dogs on the side of the house, and they usually did this when they had visitors that their dogs did not know, because their dogs were known to be quite aggressive towards strangers. They had 2 boerebollers and they were quite big, and if you know these dogs can be quite aggressive and scary. They believe that Anika opened the door for this visitor voluntarily, locked the doors voluntarily, and the 2 of them sat in a room in the house where Anika would usually smoke cigarettes. They smoked cigarettes together, and then Anika got up to make some coffee for the 2 of them, and it is believed that whilst she was making coffee for herself and the visitor, this is when she was attacked, because the coffee cups would be untouched. A scuffle had then ensued as the dining room chairs were found toppled over and the dining room table had been pushed to the side. There was also some blood found on the walls, and then she was killed in her bedroom. Because in the beginning, police were not entirely sure who they were looking for to begin with, they then decided to bring in a forensic psychologist to develop a profile of the killer. This profile told police officers what they already thought, and that is that Anika knew who her killer was. And this profile said that the level of violence and the sexualized nature of the crime scene, coupled with the position that the body was found in, all pointed towards an existing knowledge or relationship between the killer and Anika. This doesn't necessarily mean that they were friends. However, there was potentially a strong emotional connection on behalf of the killer towards Anika that could be deduced by the manner of the murder. All of these elements combined lead to the belief that this crime was psychologically motivated, as material rewards were clearly not the end game. Police officers also found a couple of witnesses. The first one was a neighbor who said that at around 12 p.m. she heard screaming. So she went outside and she tried to look over her wall, but this is when she would receive a visitor, and this visitor kind of just distracted her. So she went to the visitor and she didn't hear any more noise, any more screaming, so she kind of just forgot about these screams. Then there was the front opposite neighbor who says that at around 8 in the morning, when he got up, he saw that the front gates of the home were locked and the dogs were in the front garden. However, when he returned at around 1 p.m., the gate was unlocked and the dogs weren't in the front yard, which means that at this point, they were locked up at the side of the house. There was also the pharmacy delivery driver who got to the house at around 12 p.m. and hooted, and there was no sign of Anika. And because of these eyewitnesses, police determined that Anika was most likely murdered between 12 to 2 p.m. on the 10th of March. Police officers' investigation also led them to a string of persons of interest. So I will just be telling you them in the order that police officers discovered them. So the first person of interest was Anika's ex-boyfriend, Nico Venter. Anika and Nico had started dating about 3 months before Anika's murder, and they weren't together for that long. If I'm not mistaken, about 3 days before Anika was murdered, they had broken up. Nico was 21 years old, so he was about 3 years older than Anika, and he worked as a security guard at the Carousel Casino in Pretoria. In the beginning of their relationship, things seemed great. However, as their relationship continued, Nico says that Anika just wasn't taking the relationship as seriously as he did. To her, he believed that Anika saw their relationship as sort of like a casual relationship, almost like a situationship, but for him, he was more serious. But some of Anika's friends say that this is not true, and the reason why they broke up is because Nico was quite jealous. There was one instance where Anika was out with Nico and a couple of their other friends, and one of her guy friends called her, and this guy friend was just going through a lot at the time and was contemplating ending their life. And Anika, being a good friend, was on the phone with him and just trying to talk him down. And after this phone call, Nico went on and he was just shouting, saying that Anika was sleeping around. He really didn't like her having male friends. A neighbor and family friend had also witnessed one of Anika and Nico's fights. There was one time when they were together and Anika tried to kiss Nico, and Nico just wouldn't kiss her back and just like kept pushing her off of him. Nico had an alibi for the day of Anika's murder. He was working the entire day. However, he also made a follow-up statement that kind of raised police officers' eyebrows, and he told them that he and Anika had been texting the day of her murder, and they were supposed to meet up later that afternoon. Just 2 months after Anika's murder, Nico was arrested on the 17th of May. However, just 2 days later, he would receive bail of 10,000 rand. Nico still protested his innocence, and once social media got whiff that Nico had been arrested for Anika's murder, his friends and family also started receiving death threats. Then on the 14th of September, the trial was supposed to start, but less than 5 minutes into the trial, they decided to withdraw all of their charges against Nico Venter. And there were 2 main reasons for this. The first one is that they had video at the time of Anika's murder, and Nico was at work, so this showed that his alibi was the truth. And the second one, which was the biggest one of all, was that police officers had DNA evidence, and Nico Venter's DNA was not a match. In July 2010, a judicial inquiry into the murder of Anika Smit was ordered, and there were a couple of names added to the list of suspects, including Anika's mother and father, her ex-boyfriend Nico Venter, as well as 2 other students from her school. Charlotte was in an entirely different province at the time of Anika's murder, but her father, Johan Smit, wasn't. So that leads us to the second person of interest, Johan Smit. Although an affidavit detailing the events of that night was given by the neighbor in June 2010, it allegedly went missing from the records. However, there was a second affidavit that was given the next day, and that one would somehow remain in evidence. Johan was also questioned for 3 hours straight, and he was irritated, to say the least. He would go on to say that he was still dealing with the death of his daughter, and he was questioned by police, who would basically just tell him that he was lying. They would shout at him, and he just went on to say that he didn't know what they wanted from him, what they wanted him to say, and how police just said that his story as well as his alibi didn't add up. Years after Anika's murder, Johan was also brought back into the spotlight, and this was when a picture of him was released to the public. And in this picture, he had like this scar under his eye, and people said that this scar was like defensive wound. So Anika was fighting for her life and scratched her father under his eye. But it turned out that this picture had been taken 4 years after Anika's murder, and the reason why he had this mark under his eye is because he had surgery to remove a malignant tumor. And with this, it leads us to our third suspect, Damian Truter. At the time of today's case, Damian was 18 years old, and he was also a student at the same school as Anika, School Gerrit Maritz, and he also had a twin sister. Damian was described as a bit of a rebel. He was a year older than Anika, as well as in the grade above her, and by all means, the two of them were not friends. They were more like acquaintances. There were times during their school breaks where Anika would go to him or his group of friends and would ask for a cigarette. And there were also times where the two of them would walk home together. And this is because Anika and Damian lived relatively close to one another. They were basically neighbors. So sometimes they would walk home together. But Damian claims that he had never been inside the Smit home. It turned out that on the day of Anika's murder, Damian was not at school. But Damian has a reason for this. He says that on that day he did go to school in the morning. However, he and his girlfriend got into a fight, and this is because a girl from a lower grade had written him like a love letter, and the girlfriend had seen it, and they just got into a fight. So he decided to go home, which wasn't out of the ordinary for Damian, because sometimes he would bunk school. So Damian then went home and he grabbed his violin so that he could sell it, get some money, and buy a teddy bear for his girlfriend. In the days following Anika's murder, people from school also noticed that Damian had scratch marks on his neck. But Damian says that these scratch marks were from his sister, who scratched him a few days after Anika's death. And he says the reason why his sister had scratched him is because his sister wanted to leave the house to go see her boyfriend. And he says that his sister and the boyfriend were like fighting, and he didn't think that his sister was in the right state of mind to go see this person. So he tried to stop her from leaving the house, and this resulted in them like getting into a fight and her basically just scratching him. Police would also speak to his girlfriend at the time, who corroborated his story. Police also discovered mixed chats between Damian, who called himself Vampire, as well as someone else who called themselves Satan Eyes. I'm not too sure who this person was. They didn't say who it was, but it was these two chats that also ended up being leaked to the media. Vampire. Will you give me one ritual? I want to see a person dead. Do you have a ritual to kill? Satan Eyes. Go to the graveyard, get some dirt, a shoebox, and an item from that person. Place it onto a doll and visualize what you want to happen to this person. Channel all your hatred into it, then place the doll in a box and bury it with sand, and take the shoebox, go to the cemetery, bury the box, and cover it with sand. Vampire, that's it. As soon as this evidence came to light, people started accusing Damian of being part of the occult and into Satanism, but Damian would say that he was not into Satanism, and his friends would also say that he wasn't. It was just something that he was interested in. Police officers also searched his house and they found some books that had these satanic rituals, but Damian says that he was just curious. He says there was one instance where he did drink human blood, but he has a good reason for this. He says this happened when he was young and stupid, and he went to a party, and once he walked into the party there were like shot glasses that had this red liquid in it, and he didn't really think much of it. He just like took the red liquid and drank it, and as he was walking around the house he saw these people with like needles and like taking out blood, and he kind of just put two and two together, and that also kind of just fed into his curiosity with Satanism and everything like that. Damian also says that he found value in the association with occult interested friends because it led to people in school fearing him and him not being bullied. Damian would also explain to the court that the messages between him and Satan Eyes had nothing to do with Anika's murder, and they were messages that took place almost a year before, and they were messages related to an issue with his girlfriend and an issue that she had with another family member, and it's the same girlfriend who would later testify that she was Christian, but at the time she was interested in movies and shows about vampires. On Mixed, her username though was Penguin, so I'm not too sure who Satan Eyes is, if it was her and she just changed her name to Penguin Eyes. But anyways, their conversation was basically about her wanting Damian to get rid of someone for her, and this person was someone who had been abusing someone that she knows and loves, but they went on to tell the courts that this person was alive and well and they hadn't really went through with their plan. Damian's name was said not to be made public. However, once these messages came out, people started referring to him as vampire, and the courts put an order in place that his name and face should not be released. However, there was a Facebook page in memory of Anika, and someone released Damian's name, and because of this Facebook page also had to be shut down. But this person who did release Damian's name then was taken to court and charged with criminal injuria as well as contempt of court. And through the legal process though, this individual offered Damian an apology, which Damian accepted, and then the charges were withdrawn. But it turned out that Damian was not the person that police were looking for, and this is because Damian's DNA was not a match. But whilst we're still on the topic of Satanism and the occult, one of Anika's neighbors, so the guy that ran into the house with her dad Johan, claims that Anika was part of Satanism and the occult, and he says that sometimes she would dye her hair black and paint her nails black, and when she did this, it meant that she was part of these satanic groups, which he heard were very difficult to get out of. But he says that when she would go back to her normal self, then she would dye her hair back to blonde and should be a completely different person. So basically her hair would match her moods. When it was black, she was more detached and quieter and withdrawn, but when it was blonde, she was happy, normal, and her friendly self. Some people really believe that Anika's murder had something to do with Satanism and the occult, and the removal of her hands was linked to a ritual known as the Hand of Glory. So basically this ritual is rooted in European folklore, and it involves using the hand of a hanged man preserved and sometimes dipped in wax. So this hand would basically form a candle, and when this candle was lit using the fat of the same person, when it was lit, the light would basically immobilize anyone, and this would allow thieves to break in undisturbed. Some people also thought that this candle would put people in deep sleep, and this made this Hand of Glory popular amongst criminals. However, it was determined by an expert in the occult that Anika's murder was not linked to the occult or Satanism. And with that, let's go to our fourth person of interest. On the 17th of September 2016, a 25-year-old man walked into his local police station and confessed to the murder of Anika Smit. After this, he was taken in front of a judge, which is part of the procedure, so that he could make a full confession and his confession be admissible in court. And this man was Andre van Wyk. Andre told the courts that he could not live with what he had done and he had to take responsibility for his actions. Andre had completed school up to grade 11 and then he attended college. However, he did not finish college. He was then employed as an aircon technician and lived with his parents in Pretoria North, and he had a relatively squeaky clean police record, and he was not associated to the case before his confession. Andre was also described as a very quiet and friendly man growing up, which earned him the nickname Smiley. And it's also said that he was just like very cute and loving. And once people found out that he had confessed, everyone was shocked and they couldn't believe it. In October, Andre was then sent to Vescopi Psychiatric Hospital for a 30-day psychiatric evaluation, and this was because he told the state doctor that he did not remember what had taken place in Anika's home in 2010, and that he basically had amnesia, and sometimes he would have hallucinations and things like that. So he went to Vescopi's and he was supposed to be there for 30 days, but then they asked for him to be there for another 20 days so that they could evaluate him for longer. And after his 50 days were up, he was then said to be able to stand, he was fit to stand trial, and that was that. And Andre also decided that he was not going to apply for bail, so he would spend about a month in prison. And it said that whilst he was in prison, he told some of his fellow inmates some interesting things. Andre told his inmates that he was the one to R-word and murder Anika, and that he had buried her hands in a secret place. He also told them that he had cleaned the murder scene and told them that he wanted a tattoo of 2 hands on his chest dripping blood, and he wanted to be known as Smiley Scissorhands. So about a month after he had been in prison, police officers received news that would change everything about this entire case. And that was that Andre's DNA was not a match to the DNA that was found on the crime scene, on Anika's body. So with that, they then went back to the courts, and Andre basically just like apologized to the courts for having wasted their time, and apologized to Anika's parents for having given them false hope. And then his attorneys basically said that he should be released so that police officers can find the actual culprit. But they also applied for bail and he was denied bail. But Andre wasn't done. He then also told them that the reason why he had confessed was because the day before he walked into the police station to confess, at his company they had work drinks, and the work drinks turned into a full night of just going from one place to another, basically bar hopping with a couple of his friends, and they would go from one place to another place, and then they ended up at this club called The Buzz. And whilst they were there, he met this couple, and he said he doesn't really remember much about this couple. He just remembers that the woman had like these really green eyes, but according to him, they basically told him that he had to confess to Anika's murder or else they were going to kill him and his entire family. And he said that this is the reason why he went into the police station the next day and confessed when he did not do anything. Police officers looked into his story and they found CCTV footage that corroborated his story about having met this couple, but he didn't really speak to them for that long. He only spoke to them for about 20 seconds. Ultimately, the charges against Andre were then dropped, and police officers said that there were 3 main reasons why. The first one was obviously DNA wasn't a match. The second one was that he had recanted his confession, and the third one was that his story really lacked some details. So then on the 30th of August 2017, Andre was released. The 5th and final suspect is Reno Brink. Reno was schoolmates with Anika, and it said that during the judicial inquiry, there was another friend of Anika's, her name is Enrica, who went up and she was basically just giving information to the courts. So whilst everyone would go up and just give information to the courts about Anika and just everything surrounding the case, her father Johan would have like a notebook where he would just take a ton of notes. And it was in these notes where he said that he was just documenting all the information so that to aid in a suspect being brought forward. And it was in these notes where Johan wrote that apparently Reno had said that he went to the Smit home on the 10th of March 2010 and he tried to have intercourse with Anika. Anika refused and then an assault took place. I'm not sure if it was sexual or physical, but an assault took place, and afterwards he called Nico Venter, Anika's ex-boyfriend, and Johan says that he got all of this information from Henrika. However, Henrika was cross-examined and she denied all of these accusations, and she claimed that Johan's notebook was just full of lies. Obviously, Reno was questioned and he had two contradicting statements. I'm not too sure what he said in his statements, but in the first one, he basically provided an alibi for Nico, or Nico provided an alibi for him. And then in the second statement, it was just very contradictory. But that's kind of where it ends. In 2019, the inquiry into the murder of Anika was put on hold indefinitely, and a judge ruled that the matter would be back in court once everyone was able and ready to continue. On the 16th of October 2024, so just last month, Johan Smit hired STRICTEST investigators to look into the death of his daughter. As of this recording in November 2024, the murder docket is still open. If you have any relevant information regarding the murder of Anika Smit on the 10th of March 2010, please contact the STRICTEST specialist investigators immediately. I will put their contact details in the description box below. And that's it for today's case. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out my channel a lot, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.